If your AC system is the wrong size for your house, you're gonna have problems. And not just small problems. We're talking expensive, irritating, annoying, why is my house so hot type of problems. So here's the thing. If your system is too small, it's gonna run all day just trying to keep up. It'll never really quite get there, at least certainly not to where you're hoping it'll get, and it'll also burn itself out before its time simply because it's trying to make up for all of that extra work. But if your system's too big, that can actually be worse. It'll blast cold air, shut off, blast it again, then shut off again. That's actually called short cycling. You'll just wind up with hot and cold spots all over your house. And in the worst case, you could even end up with mold because an oversized system doesn't actually run long enough to pull humidity out of the air. So getting the size right actually matters a lot. Today we're answering one of the most common asked questions from our homeowners. What size AC system do I actually need? So I'm gonna give you a simple rule of thumb that you can use to ballpark for yourself. But I'll also tell you why you need to use a real professional to run the numbers before you buy anything. All right, let's get into it. So like I mentioned earlier, if your system is too small, essentially it's going to be running all the time, overworking itself relative to the size of space it needs to cool, and ultimately burn out long before its actual rated lifetime. This equals higher energy bills because the system is running all the time, and you're not going to get any satisfaction as a homeowner because it'll never feel quite cool enough, which is why it's running all the darn time. So on the flip side, if you've got a system that is too big for the space that you're trying to cool, you're gonna wind up with what we call short cycling. And that's basically a cycle where the system kicks on, blasts really cold air for a short while, turns off, and then kicks on, blasts again, and keeps going on that cycle for the whole day. The net result of that is essentially really high utility bills because it's constantly blasting at such a high rate. You're gonna wind up with uneven spots in your home that are both hot and cold depending on where you're standing. It generally just feels either far too cold or not cold enough. And then last but not least, because it only runs for short periods of time, it doesn't actually pull enough moisture out of the air, and you can wind up with condensation and therefore mold inside your house as well. So in conclusion, bigger isn't always better. I know that's tough to hear, but there's real dollar and cents behind that. You know, much like the childhood story of the three bears, we really want to try to get into the Goldilocks zone when it comes to your HVAC. You don't want it too big and you don't want it too small. You really want to be where it's just enough for you to be comfortable, where you're using just enough electricity to maintain that state, and you're good. Since we're on the topic about size anyways, let's really talk about AC unit size, which in most cases is referred to as tonnage. Tonnage really refers to the size and cooling capacity of your HVAC system. So for example, if we're talking about a 1-ton system, we're really just talking about 12,000 BTUs of energy usage. Here in Southern California, because we do have really hot summers, you're gonna see tonnage ranging anywhere between 1 ton all the way up to 5-ton units. Like we mentioned earlier, 12,000 BTUs will correspond to 1 ton. If you go to a 3-ton unit, you're looking at 36,000 BTUs. So if you take a look at this chart up here, you can see that AC units can vary anywhere between 1 to 5 tons. And that goes anywhere between 12,000 BTUs all the way up to 60,000 BTUs. Okay, so let's talk next about climate zones and why that matters. Here in Southern California, if you've got a home along the coast, let's say anywhere in Newport Beach or Orange County where it's closer to the ocean, your requirements may not be as high as a home that you would find in, let's say, in the Inland Empire in Riverside County. Those are two very different zones with very different heat intensities during the summer. And so that's definitely something you want to take into consideration. So given the previous factors we discussed, such as climate zone and tonnage, there is a general calculation we can use to kind of help you ballpark how much AC you really need. You're going to want 400 to 500 square feet per ton of AC cooling. If you've got an ADU, for example, that is 500 square feet, then you know that a 1-ton unit should do you fine. However, in most homes here in Southern California, you're looking at anywhere between 1,000 square feet on up, and so that number will change. So for example, at a 1,200 square feet, you're gonna want like a 3-ton unit. Now just remember, this is just a ballpark. There are factors that will definitely affect this, such as the age of the home, the type of insulation, what types of windows you have. So just to get you in the right direction, as a general rule of thumb, you're gonna wanna have 1 ton for every 400 to 500 square feet of cooling space that you need. Hey, so if you live in Southern California and you're thinking about replacing your AC, or maybe you just wanna know if you were sized correctly, feel free to click the link below and get a free quote. I know we spoke about square footage as being a big determiner of how much AC you need. However, we also mentioned that that's not the only factor. So let's get into some of those other ones. Let's start with older homes, right? If your home was built in the 1980s or earlier, chances are you're going to need a larger system than a home that was built after that. And really, that's just because construction was different back then. Insulation was just not as good. Most windows are single pane windows, and there's a lot of air leakage. So those are gaps that need to be covered by a larger system. Now, if you've got a newer build or maybe a renovated home that has been kind of brought up to spec, then you could stand to have a smaller system because it'll still get more done because it's just a more efficient building overall. You know, this may seem like stating the obvious, but the insulation in your home really matters. It actually makes the difference between your system having to work really hard to keep it cool versus it just running steadily because the insulation was good enough to maintain the cool state of your home. You know, beyond square footage, right? Windows really matter. In most older homes, like we mentioned, a lot of them are single pane homes, and the direction in which they face matters too. Because if you've got a home that has a lot of south and west facing windows, you've got a lot of heat gain throughout the day. So you're really going to want to rely on double pane windows to keep that heat to a minimum. And if you don't have that, you know that you're going to need to size up your system, replace the windows, or do something to help mitigate that. Ceiling height. You know, a lot of folks don't talk about this, but a lot of homes in the past had 8-foot ceilings. But today, modern homes, they can go anywhere between 10 feet, 12 feet on higher. The more airspace you have to cool, the more cooling power you need. Here's something we actually see quite often: poor ducting in the home. Now, poor ducting can either mean it was designed poorly where the air doesn't circulate well, or it could be that it was assembled poorly and there's just leaks throughout the ducting itself. Both of these scenarios just means that your AC unit needs to work harder. So both the occupancy load and the electrical load on your home also makes a difference. What does that really mean? Well, if you've got a bunch of computer servers running, you know that they're kicking out tons of heat coming out of the back of those computers. That's something that you're going to have to consider. Or we're talking about maybe a home where 2 people live versus where 6 people live. That's also going to add a lot of heat to the house that you also have to keep in mind. And so these are all things that need to be taken into consideration when sizing your system. The point of all of this is square footage does matter when considering the size of your AC system. However, just like we discussed, there are other factors that affect this. In fact, it is safe to say that you could have 2 1,500 square foot homes that would require 2 completely different system sizes just based on those other attributes we talked about, such as windows, occupancy, and electrical load. That's why we don't just rely on square footage to size your system. We also take into consideration all of these other factors as well to make sure that your home is right-sized for the right AC. Lots of homeowners come to us asking for battery storage specifically to offset their AC usage. And if we have a poor understanding of the AC usage, that also means that the battery may not be the right size, and it would be equivalent of trying to pour water into a pitcher that has a hole at the bottom. You're just constantly trying to cover, but it never actually happens. So here are a few basic rules to keep in mind. Don't guess, don't let your contractor guess, do the math, and make sure the system actually fits your home. At Net Zero Energy and Roofing, we're not here to sell you the largest system. We're here to get you the right system for your home. One that runs efficiently, keeps you comfortable, and plays nice with your solar and battery storage system as well. If you're in Southern California and you want someone to take an honest look at your setup, roofing, AC, solar, all of it, click the link in the description for a free energy assessment. We'll tell you exactly what you need. If this video helped you out, hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a comment if you've got any questions.